The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I stood at the counter, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. December 23rd. 2 days before Christmas, I was staring at a text message that had arrived at 6:47 a.m. Mom, can we talk about Christmas brunch? Dad wants to come. Please don't make this awkward. Melissa, my daughter, 28 years old, married, with twin boys I adored, and she was asking me not to make things awkward with him. I set the mug down harder than I intended. The sound echoed through my empty house that had been full of laughter and chaos for 25 years before. Richard decided he needed to find himself at 53. Apparently, he was living in a downtown condo with Amanda, his 31-year-old former assistant. That was 3 years ago. The divorce had been brutal. Not because of the legalities, those were surprisingly simple when one party wants out so desperately they'll sign anything. No, it was brutal because of the silence that followed. The way our children, Melissa, Jacob, and Sophie had split their loyalties like dividing up furniture. The way holidays became negotiations rather than celebrations. I picked up my phone and typed, "Of course, honey, whatever you want." The lie tasted bitter even through text. The next 2 days passed in a blur of grocery shopping, cooking, and silent rehearsals of civility. I made Richard's favorite cranberry sauce, then immediately questioned why. Muscle memory, perhaps? Or maybe some pathetic part of me still trying to prove I was the better choice. Christmas morning arrived with snow. The kind of picture-perfect white Christmas that belonged on greeting cards. My house smelled of cinnamon rolls and coffee as I set the table for 8. Me, Richard, Melissa and her husband Tom, Jacob and his girlfriend Claire, and Sophie, who was flying solo this year after her own recent breakup. The doorbell rang at 10:30 sharp. Melissa's family. "Merry Christmas, Mom." Melissa's voice was too bright, too forced. She thrust a poinsettia into my hands and herded the twins inside, their excited chatter filling the entryway. "Grandma, Grandma, we got a Nintendo Switch." 6-year-old Marcus was already peeling off his coat. "And Dad let us stay up until midnight," Ethan added, his identical face beaming. I caught the guilty look that flashed across Melissa's face. "They're a bit wound up," she apologized. "They're perfect," I said, meaning it. I bent down to hug them both. Breathing in their little boy scent of syrup and winter air. Tom appeared behind them, carrying a casserole dish. "Morning, Carol. You look great." "Liar, but I appreciate it." I managed a genuine smile for my son, who had always maintained careful neutrality in the family drama. The next 20 minutes brought Jacob and Claire, bearing wine and awkward smiles. Sophie arrived on their heels, looking tired but determined. We gathered in the living room, the conversation stilted and careful, everyone performing a charade of normalcy. Then the doorbell rang again. The room fell silent. Even the twins seemed to sense the shift in energy. "I'll get it," Melissa said quickly, jumping up. I stayed seated, my hands clasped in my lap. Willing myself to breathe normally, I heard the door open, heard Melissa's greeting, and then I heard her voice. "Merry Christmas. I hope it's okay that I came." Richard said it would be fine. Amanda. She walked into my living room like she belonged there, wearing a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my mortgage payment and carrying a designer handbag I'd seen in a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like the kind of woman who had never scrubbed crayon off a wall at 2 a.m., or hidden in a bathroom to cry because the baby wouldn't stop screaming. Behind her, Richard entered with the apologetic expression I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that said, "I knew you'd be upset, but I did it anyway." "Carol, I hope you don't mind," he started. "Of course she doesn't mind," Amanda interrupted, her voice sugary. "This is about family, right? And since Richard and I are getting married in March, I'm practically family already." The room spun slightly. Married, March. That was 3 months away, and this was the first I was hearing of it. I watched my children's faces. Melissa had gone pale. Jacob's jaw was clenched so tight I worried about his teeth. Sophie looked like she might throw her wine glass. "You didn't tell them," I said quietly, my eyes on Richard. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I wanted to wait for the right moment. "And you thought Christmas brunch at your ex-wife's house was the right moment?" Sophie's voice was nice. "Sophie, please," Richard began. "No, Dad. This is messed up, and you know it." Amanda's perfectly painted lips formed a pout. "I just wanted to be part of the family. Is that so wrong?" The twins, sensing tension, had gone quiet in the corner. Marcus clutched his new toy. His earlier excitement dimmed. Ethan looked between the adults with worried eyes. Something inside me snapped. not into anger that would have been easier. Instead, it snapped into a strange, crystalline clarity. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and smiled. Amanda, welcome. Richard, congratulations on your engagement. Please, everyone, let's eat. The food's getting cold. The shock on their faces was almost worth it. We moved to the dining room in stunned silence. I seated everyone with deliberate care, placing Amanda next to Richard at the far end of the table, away from me. The twins flanked me, my little allies, though they didn't know it yet. As I brought out dish after dish, I watched Richard. I really watched him for the first time in 3 years. He'd aged. The gray at his temples had spread, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He kept adjusting his collar, a nervous habit from our early days together. Amanda, meanwhile, was working the room. Oh, Carol, this looks amazing. Richard told me you were a wonderful cook. He's always talking about your pot roast. She laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. I keep trying to recreate your recipes, but they never turn out quite right. You'll have to give me your secrets. Some things can't be taught, I said pleasantly. They're learned through years of practice. Sophie snorted into her water glass. The meal proceeded with painful politeness. Richard carved the ham, his traditional role, apparently still in effect despite everything. Amanda complimented every dish while somehow making each compliment sound like an insult. The children tried to maintain conversation, but it felt like walking through a minefield. So, Mom, Jacob said, clearly trying to shift the focus. How's the catering business going? Ah yes, the catering business I'd started 18 months ago, after realizing I needed something more than alimony and memories. Something that was mine. Actually, it's going incredibly well, I said, and I realized with surprise that I meant it. I just landed a contract with the Riverside Hotel for their spring events, and I've been featured in local flavor magazine. That's wonderful, Carol, Tom said warmly. Melissa squeezed his hand, her eyes grateful. Oh, how nice, Amanda chirped. Playing with food. That must keep you busy. Playing with food. The words hung in the air like poison. It's a 6-figure business, Sophie said flatly. She employs 12 people and has a waiting list 3 months long. But sure, let's call it playing with food. Richard cleared his throat. Sophie, Amanda didn't mean Dad. Stop. Melissa's voice was quiet but firm. Just ... stop. The table fell silent again. Marcus tugged on my sleeve. Grandma, can we have dessert soon? Soon, sweetheart, I promised, stroking his hair. Amanda leaned forward, her eyes on the twins with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, Richard and I are hoping to have children of our own. Maybe twins. Wouldn't that be something? Richard. New siblings for your grandchildren. The fork slipped from Jacob's hand and clattered against his plate. I kept my smile fixed. That would be something indeed. But inside, something else was clicking into place. A plan. A realization. Because in that moment, watching Amanda's calculated performance and Richard's uncomfortable squirming, I understood something crucial. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about timing. It was about knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. It was about letting people dig their own graves while you held the shovel. And Christmas brunch, it turned out, was about to get very interesting indeed. The transition to dessert should have been a relief. Fresh air from the kitchen, a moment to collect myself. Instead, as I stood at the counter arranging homemade apple pie and chocolate cake, I heard Amanda's voice drift in from the dining room. Richard, darling, should we tell them the other news? My hand stilled on the pie server. Amanda, not now, Richard said, his voice low. But they should know. It affects everyone. I walked back into the dining room, carrying the desserts with steady hands despite my racing heart. Other news. Amanda was practically glowing. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. We're buying a house, Amanda announced. A gorgeous 5-bedroom in Willow Heights. You know, the new development. All stone facades and 3-car garages. It has this incredible media room perfect for the grandkids to visit. Willow Heights, the development where houses started at $1.2 million. The same development Richard and I had looked at 15 years ago, when we were saving for the kids' college funds and decided it was too extravagant. How wonderful, I said, setting down the desserts. Though I'm curious, Willow Heights is quite expensive. That's quite a commitment. Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw the flash of panic. We've been planning carefully with Richard's portfolio doing so well. We can afford it. Amanda cut in. Plus, there's my income from my new consulting firm. Though Richard's investment returns have been exceptional this year, something cold settled in my stomach. Investment returns. Tech stocks, Amanda continued, oblivious to the warning signs. Richard moved everything into tech 6 months ago. It's been incredible. He's made back everything the divorce cost and then some. The room had gone very quiet. Melissa's face had drained of color. Jacob's eyes were fixed on his father with an expression I couldn't read. Dad, Sophie said slowly, didn't you tell us you couldn't help with my business loan because your portfolio took a hit in the divorce? Richard's collar adjustment became frantic. That was, the market recovered. You told me you couldn't contribute to the twins' education fund because you were rebuilding. Melissa added, her voice shaking. That was 4 months ago. I remained standing, pie server still in my hand, watching my ex-husband's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. It's complicated, Richard stammered. The timing, you said you couldn't make Grandma's 80th birthday party because you couldn't afford the flight to Arizona. Jacob said, his voice hard, but apparently you can afford $1 million house. Amanda's smile had finally faltered. Wait, Richard said you kids understood that he needed to establish his new life. Establish his new life. Sophie stood up, her chair scraping back. By lying to his children about money. By telling us he was struggling while he was actually doing better than before. Sophie, please sit down, Richard said, his authoritative father voice emerging. This isn't the time or place. No, Dad. This is exactly the time and place. Sophie turned to me. Mom, did you know about any of this? I set down the pie server carefully. I know that in our divorce settlement, your father disclosed his assets as of 3 years ago. I know that the judge awarded me 40% of the marital assets based on that disclosure. And I know that if someone substantially misrepresented their finances during a divorce proceeding, or hid assets that later became available. I paused, meeting Richard's eyes. Well, that would be fraud. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Carol, I didn't. Richard started. You didn't do that. Lie. Because it seems like lying is something of a specialty. I sat down, suddenly calm. Please, everyone eat dessert. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. Nobody moved except the twins, who, bless them, were more interested in chocolate cake than adult drama. Amanda recovered first, her smile brittle. This is ridiculous. Richard didn't hide anything. He made smart investments after the divorce. That's not fraud. It's good financial planning. After the divorce, Jacob pulled out his phone. Dad, you texted me in August 3 months before the divorce was final asking for the contact information of my friend who works at TechCorp. You said you were curious about the company. That was right before TechCorp stock tripled, wasn't it? Richard's face had gone from red to pale. Jacob, I don't remember. I have the texts. Want me to read them? This is absurd. Amanda's voice rose. You're all ganging up on him because you can't accept that he's moved on and found happiness. No, Melissa said quietly. We're reacting to finding out our father lied to us. Repeatedly, while asking Mom for understanding and cooperation in the divorce. I took a bite of pie, letting them process, let them see Richard for what he was, not the villain of my narrative, but the author of his own downfall. Richard stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Amanda, we're leaving. Yes, we are. Amanda grabbed her designer bag. Carol, I'm sorry your family is so bitter that they can't be happy for us. Maybe when you've all had time to grow up, sit down. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. To my surprise, they both froze. I stood up, walked to my kitchen desk, and pulled out a folder I'd placed there this morning. I thought I might need it. Call it mother's intuition, or maybe just experience with Richard's patterns. I hired a forensic accountant 6 weeks ago, I said conversationally, returning to the table. Just a precaution, you understand. I'd been hearing through mutual friends that Richard was doing remarkably well, living large, as they say, which seemed odd given what he'd claimed during our divorce. Richard's face went absolutely white. And do you know what my forensic accountant found? In the 6 months before our divorce was finalized, Richard moved $347,000 from our joint investment account into a private trading account, an account he never disclosed. An account he used to make the tech investments Amanda is so proud of. I opened the folder, pulling out papers. He also took out a home equity line of credit against our house. The house I was awarded in the divorce 2 weeks before the settlement. He told the bank he needed it for home improvements. He pocketed the money and never made a single improvement. By the time I got the house, it had this secret line on it that I've been paying off for 2 years. Melissa had her hand over her mouth. Tom had his arm around her, his expression shocked. The best part, I continued, he listed his salary as $20,000 less than his actual income on the financial disclosure forms. His company provided me with documentation showing his real salary after I submitted a formal inquiry. They were very cooperative once they understood there might be legal irregularities. You can't prove, Richard started. I can prove all of it. Bank records, tax documents, company payroll files, trading account statements, everything. I smiled, and it felt genuine for the first time that day. I've already filed a motion to reopen the divorce settlement. My lawyer says we have an excellent case for fraud. The penalties for hiding assets during a divorce are quite severe in this state. Amanda looked at Richard with growing horror. You said the divorce was clean. You said there wouldn't be any complications. There wouldn't have been. I said pleasantly, if Richard had been honest. If he'd simply disclosed his assets and income accurately, we would have divided things fairly, and none of this would matter. But he chose to lie. To cheat. To hide money while our children watched me struggle to rebuild my life. Mom, you've been struggling. Sophie's voice was small. I looked at my youngest daughter. The first year was hard. Your father left me with less than I was legally entitled to because he lied about what we had. I started the catering business because I needed income, not because I wanted a hobby. I worked 16-hour days to build something. And yes, it's successful now. But it didn't have to be that hard. Carol, please. Richard's voice was broken. Don't do this. The kids don't need to hear. The kids are adults. Jacob interrupted. And we did need to hear this. We needed to know why you kept saying you couldn't help us financially. Why Mom was working herself to exhaustion while you were making investments and buying houses. Amanda's perfectly made-up face was crumbling. Richard, you told me the divorce was her fault. You said she was unreasonable, that she took everything he lied to you too. I said, almost gently, that's what he does. He tells people what they want to hear, and he rearranges the truth to make himself look better. It's not about you, Amanda. It's about him. She looked at Richard, really looked at him, and I saw the moment the illusion shattered. The house. We can't actually afford it if you have to pay Carol more in the settlement, can we? Richard said nothing. Can we? Her voice rose. We'll figure it out, Richard mumbled. You lied to me. Amanda's voice was hollow. About everything. The divorce, the money, our future. Amanda, let's go home and discuss this privately. No. She stood up, grabbed her bag again. I need some time to think. About everything. She walked out, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The front door opened and closed. Richard looked around the table at his children's faces, seeing no sympathy there. Then his eyes landed on me. You planned this, he said. You knew she'd be here. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone? No, Richard. I stood up, collecting dessert plates that no one had touched except the twins. You planned this. You chose to lie. You chose to bring Amanda here. You chose to flaunt your success while your children thought you were struggling. I just chose to stop protecting you from the consequences. You vindictive dad. Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. Don't finish that sentence. Don't you dare. Richard looked at his son, his namesake, and whatever he saw there made him stop. I think you should leave, Melissa said quietly. We'll call you ... sometime, when we're ready. This is insane. You're all overreacting. Leave, Dad. Sophie's voice was firm. Now. He left, shoulders hunched, without another word. The front door closed behind him with a soft click. The silence that followed was profound. Then Marcus, sweet innocent Marcus, looked up from his chocolate cake and asked, Is Grandpa in trouble? 7 adult faces turned to him. And despite everything, despite the drama and pain and revelations, I started to laugh. Yes, sweetheart, I said, ruffling his hair. Grandpa is in trouble, but Grandma is going to be just fine. After Richard left, no one moved for a full minute. We sat frozen like a photograph, the remnants of Christmas brunch spread before us, the weight of revelations settling into our bones. It was Tom who finally spoke, even the practical one. Well, that was a lot. The understatement broke the spell. Sophie started laughing, that slightly hysterical laughter that comes when you don't know whether to cry or scream. Melissa joined her, then Jacob, until the whole table was shaking with it, the tension releasing in waves. Mom, Jacob said when he could breathe again, how long have you known about his financial situation? I started suspecting about a year ago. He was too confident, too comfortable. The Richard I knew would have been worried about retirement, about stability. This Richard was buying new cars and taking vacations. It didn't add up. Why didn't you tell us? Sophie asked. I considered the question carefully, because I needed to be sure, and because... I paused, gathering my thoughts. because I didn't want you to choose sides based on my suspicions. I wanted you to see him clearly, to make your own decisions about the kind of man he is. The kind of man who lies to his children, Melissa said bitterly. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. I defended him. When you guys were angry after the divorce, I kept saying we needed to give him grace. That starting over was hard. And he was lying the whole time. Tom handed her a napkin. You were being kind. That's not a bad thing. It feels bad right now. I reached across the table and took my daughter's hand. Your capacity for compassion is a strength, not a weakness. Don't let your father's choices change that about you. Are you really reopening the divorce settlement? Jacob asked. Yes. I filed the motion last week. My lawyer says we have a strong case. I squeezed Melissa's hand before releasing it. The money isn't really the point though. I'm doing fine now. The business is successful. But he needs to face consequences for what he did. And honestly, if he's planning to remarry, Amanda deserves to know exactly who she's marrying. She seemed pretty shaken. Claire observed quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since the drama began. Do you think she'll go through with the wedding? That's her decision to make, I said. I actually hope she takes some time to think carefully about what kind of life she wants. She's young. She has options Richard and I didn't have at her age. Sophie shook her head in wonder. Mom, you're being remarkably calm about all this. Am I? I stood up and started clearing plates, needing to move. Inside, I'm furious. I'm hurt. I'm vindicated and angry and sad all at once. But I've had 3 years to process the divorce. You've had 3 hours to process the lies. Give yourselves time to feel whatever you need to feel. The twins, who had been remarkably patient through all the adult conversation, chose that moment to request they be excused to play with their new toys. Melissa nodded, and they scampered off to the living room, their excited voices a reminder that life continued despite family drama. I need to ask you something, Mom. Jacob followed me into the kitchen, his voice low. Did you really struggle? I mean, you always seemed fine when we visited. You were starting the business, you seemed energized. I was struggling, I interrupted gently. I just didn't want you to know how much. You were dealing with your own grief about the divorce, your own anger. I didn't want to add to that by making you worry about me financially. But we could have helped. You're my children. It's not your job to support your mother financially. It's your job to build your own lives. I rinsed a plate and loaded it into the dishwasher. Besides, struggling made me stronger. I learned what I was capable of. I built something that's mine, that no one can take away. Would I have rather not gone through it? Of course. But I can't regret where I ended up. Jacob pulled me into a hug, his tall frame engulfing me. I'm proud of you, Mom, and I'm sorry I didn't see what Dad was doing. Neither did I, for a long time. He's good at hiding things. Practice, probably. When we returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted. Melissa, Sophie, and Claire were discussing how to handle future holidays, how to navigate the family dynamics now that everything had shifted again. I don't want to see him, Sophie said flatly. Not for a while. Maybe not ever. Is that wrong? It's not wrong, I assured her. It's honest. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with your father based on his behavior, not his title. But what about family? Melissa asked. Don't we have an obligation to what? To maintain a relationship with someone who repeatedly lied to us. Jacob's voice was hard. Family isn't an obligation to accept bad treatment. It's supposed to be about love and trust. You sound like Mom's lawyer, Sophie teased gently. Actually, that's all Carol, Tom said. She's been saying that for years. I think we all just needed to be ready to hear it. The front door opened, and we all tensed. But it was just Richard's footsteps on the porch. He must have forgotten something. Then we heard his car start and drive away. He was probably hoping to catch Amanda, Claire observed. She won't be there, I said with certainty. She's too smart for that. She'd take some time, do her own investigating, and make her decision based on facts, not emotions. At least, I hope she will. Do you feel bad for her? Melissa asked. I considered the question. I feel bad that she's learning a hard lesson. I feel bad that Richard used her the same way he used me. As a reflection of what he wanted to be rather than accepting who he actually was. But do I feel responsible for her pain? No. Richard made these choices. He created this situation. That's very mature of you, Tom said. Therapy helps, I replied dryly. I recommend it for all of you. Processing this is going to take time. We spent the rest of the afternoon together. The conversation eventually moving away from Richard and Amanda and back to normal family topics. The twins performed an elaborate show with their new toys. We played board games. We ate leftovers and laughed at old family stories, carefully editing around the Richard-shaped holes in our memories. Around 5 o'clock, families started preparing to leave. As Melissa bundled up the twins, she pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to apologize. I pushed you to invite Dad. I thought I was helping, keeping the peace. Instead, I put you in an impossible situation. You were trying to maintain your family. That's natural. But I prioritized his comfort over your dignity. I asked you not to make things awkward when he's the one who made everything awkward by bringing his fiancée to your home without asking." I touched her cheek, seeing my strong, compassionate daughter struggling with her own guilt. "Melissa, you're not responsible for managing everyone's feelings. Not mine, not your father's. You don't have to be the peacekeeper." "Then what do I do?" "Whatever feels right to you. If you want a relationship with your father, have one. If you need space, take it, but make those choices for yourself. Not because you're trying to hold together a family that he broke." She hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't see how hard things were for you. I love you too, and there's nothing to apologize for." After they all left, I stood in my quiet house, looking at the aftermath of Christmas brunch. Dirty dishes, scattered napkins, toys the twins had forgotten, evidence of life, of family, of complicated love. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Amanda. Can we talk? Not today, but soon. I have questions." I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, "Yes, when you're ready." Another buzz, this time from my lawyer. "Heard there was drama at Christmas. Hope you're okay. Richard's attorney called. He wants to negotiate." I smiled. Of course he did. "Let him stew until after New Year's." I typed back, "Then we can talk numbers." As I cleaned up the kitchen, I thought about revenge. The internet loved revenge stories, dramatic confrontations, public humiliations, elaborate schemes. But real revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about drama. It was about standing up, speaking the truth, and letting someone face the natural consequences of their actions. I hadn't humiliated Richard. He'd done that himself by lying, by bringing Amanda to my home, by flaunting success he'd built on deception. I'd simply stopped protecting him from his own choices. And that, I realized, was its own kind of freedom. The next few days passed in a strange calm. My children called frequently, processing their feelings, asking questions, seeking reassurance. I gave them what I could while maintaining my own boundaries. This was their pain to work through, their relationship with their father to define or redefine. Richard called twice. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading. I saved them. My lawyer said they might be useful, but I didn't respond. I'd said everything I needed to say. Amanda texted again on December 28th. "Coffee tomorrow? I promise not to take much of your time." I agreed, curious despite myself. We met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. She arrived on time, wearing jeans and minimal makeup, a stark contrast to her Christmas appearance. She looked young, tired, and scared. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You're welcome. I've been doing research, talking to Richard's colleagues, looking at financial records, trying to understand what's true and what's not." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Everything you said at Christmas checks out. He lied about the divorce. He hid assets. And he's been lying to me too about his relationship with his kids, about his finances, about his plans for our future." "I'm sorry you had to learn that way," I said, meaning it. "Are you? Because part of me wonders if you orchestrated the whole thing to hurt him, to hurt both of us." I considered her question seriously. "Did I know you'd be there on Christmas Day? No. Did I have information ready because I thought there might be a confrontation? Yes. Did I want to hurt you specifically? No. Did I care if Richard was hurt? Honestly, at this point, I'm indifferent to Richard's pain. He made his choices." She flinched, but nodded. "That's fair. I know I'm complicit in what happened to you. I was sleeping with a married man. I justified it because Richard said the marriage was over, that you'd both emotionally checked out, but that doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I was 28, ambitious, and stupid. I thought he was my ticket to the life I wanted. I thought he was honest, and now I'm 31, slightly less stupid, and engaged to a man I'm not sure I know at all." She looked at me directly. "Tell me something. When did you realize he wasn't who you thought he was?" I thought back. Little moments, over years. The way he'd reshape stories to make himself the hero. The way he'd lie about small things for no reason, where he'd been, who he'd talked to, what he'd spent. I'd catch him and he'd get defensive, make me feel like I was being paranoid or controlling. Then he'd be extra charming for a few weeks, and I'd convince myself I'd overreacted. He does that, she said quietly. The charm offensive after getting caught in something. It's a pattern. And here's what I learned too late. People don't usually change those fundamental patterns. They might manage them better, hide them more carefully, but the core behavior remains. Amanda was quiet for a long moment. The house in Willow Heights, we can't afford it. Not if he has to pay you what he actually owes from the divorce. He knew that when he made the offer. He thought you'd never find out about the hidden assets. Probably, I agreed. So our whole future together is built on a lie. On money that isn't really his. That's one way to look at it. What's another way? I leaned forward. Another way is that you're 31 years old with a successful consulting business and your whole life ahead of you. You can choose to marry someone who lies to you, who lies to his children, who commits financial fraud to get what he wants. Or you can choose differently. The house, the lifestyle, the fairy tale, those aren't the relationship. They're just set dressing. You sound like you've thought about this a lot. 3 years of therapy, I said with a small smile. Money well spent. She laughed, a genuine sound. I can't believe I'm sitting here taking advice from the woman whose husband I stole. I can't believe you think you stole him. Amanda, Richard isn't a possession. He's a man who makes choices. You made choices too. Yes, but ultimately, he's responsible for ending his marriage, just like he's responsible for what happens in yours. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. A text from Richard. Where are you? We need to talk about your conversation with Carol. Don't believe everything she tells you. He knows we're meeting, she said. He's been texting constantly. He says you're trying to poison me against him. Am I? I don't think so. I think you're just being honest. Which is more than he's ever been with me. She put her phone away. I'm not going to marry him. The words hung in the air between us. Are you sure? I asked. Because that's a big decision, and you don't owe me anything. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. I'm 31, not 28. I've built my own business. I don't need to be rescued or elevated by a man who lies to everyone around him. She stood up, gathering her coat. Thank you, Carol. For being honest. For not being cruel when you had every right to be. For showing me what dignity looks like. Amanda, I said, as she turned to leave. One more thing. Whatever you decide about Richard, get your own lawyer. Protect yourself financially. Don't trust his version of events or his promises about the future. Already done, she said with a small smile. Turns out your forensic accountant is taking new clients. After she left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, processing. I felt oddly light, as if something I'd been carrying had finally been set down. This wasn't vindictiveness or revenge in the traditional sense. This was simply the truth having its day. My phone buzzed. My lawyer, Richard, wants to settle. He's offering an additional $150,000 plus covering all legal fees. Thoughts? I typed back. Counter with $300,000. Split of the tech portfolio gains, and full disclosure of all assets with penalties for future non-disclosure. He committed fraud. He doesn't get to negotiate from strength. 3 dots appeared. Then, you've learned a lot. I'll send the counteroffer. I had learned a lot. I'd learned that justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just persistence, documentation, and refusing to accept someone else's version of reality. I'd learned that revenge is sweetest when you don't have to do anything, when someone's own actions provide all the consequences necessary. And I'd learned that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about putting yourself back together, piece by piece, until you're whole again. Stronger? Maybe. Wiser? Definitely. But most importantly, yours. New Year's Eve arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm. I spent the day at my commercial kitchen, preparing for a private party that evening, a last-minute booking that would pay the equivalent of 3 weeks of regular business. My staff worked efficiently around me, the rhythm of professional cooking as soothing as meditation. Boss, you seem happy, said Marcus, my head chef, not my grandson, though the name coincidence always made me smile. Good holidays. Interesting holidays, I corrected, but yes, good overall. My phone had been blowing up all week. Richard's increasingly desperate messages, my lawyer's updates on the settlement negotiations, my children process conversations, and, surprisingly, supportive texts from friends who'd somehow heard about the Christmas drama and wanted to offer solidarity. But the most unexpected message came on New Year's Eve morning. Carol, it's Richard. Can we please talk? Not about the settlement. About the kids. They won't answer my calls. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I called him, putting him on speaker as I crimped pie dough. Carol. His voice was hoarse, defeated. Thank you for calling back. You said this was about the kids. It is. They've blocked me. All 3 of them. Even Melissa, who's always been, understanding. I just want to explain what Richard, that you lied. They know, that you hid assets. They know, that you've been pretending to struggle while living comfortably. They know all of it. I wasn't lying about everything. I did struggle after the divorce. Emotionally, psychologically. Then you should have been honest about the financial part. You should have told them you were doing well financially but needed support in other ways. Instead, you let them believe you couldn't help them because you were broke. Silence on the other end. Then, Sophie asked me for a loan for her business. $30,000. I told her I couldn't afford it. That same month, I bought a boat. I know, she told me. Of course she did. He sounded bitter, then caught himself. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to. Carol, I know I've made mistakes. A lot of mistakes. But they're still my children. How do I fix this? I stopped crimping dough and really considered his question. You can't fix it, Richard. Not the way you want to. You can't make a grand gesture or offer them money or promise to change and have everything go back to how it was. You broke their trust. It's going to take time. And it's going to take genuine change. And even then, it might never be the same. So what do? You give them space. You work on yourself, real work, with a therapist, not just lip service. You become rigorously honest about everything, even when it's uncomfortable. You accept that they might not trust you again for a very long time, and you stop trying to manage how they feel about you. That's it. Just wait and hope. That's all any of us can do when we've hurt the people we love. We can't control their healing process. We can only control our own choices going forward. Another long silence. Then, Amanda left me. I took her stuff yesterday while I was at work. Left the ring on the counter. I'm sorry, are you? He sounded genuinely curious, not accusatory. Yes. I'm sorry you're alone. I'm sorry your choices led to this. I'm sorry that you're facing consequences that hurt. I don't wish you pain, Richard. I just stopped accepting your pain as my responsibility. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Be alone. Start over. I'm 56 years old, Carol, who starts over at 56. I did, at 53. It's hard, but it's possible. And honestly, you're starting from a much better financial position than I was, even with the settlement adjustments. He gave a short, bitter laugh. True, my lawyer says you're going to get most of what you asked for. The judge isn't happy about the hidden assets. Neither was I. For what it's worth, I am sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am. I thought I was being smart, protecting myself. I didn't think about how it would hurt you or the kids. I wanted to win. I wanted to come out ahead. That's honest, at least. Yeah, well, honesty is apparently my new thing. My therapist's orders. Speaking of which, she wants me to make amends. To genuinely apologize to you, to the kids, to Amanda, to take responsibility instead of making excuses. That's good advice. If I write letters to the kids, will you read them first? Tell me if I'm still being defensive or making excuses. I know I have no right to ask. Send them to me. I'll read them. But Richard, I'm going to be honest too. If you're doing this to manipulate them into forgiving you faster, it won't work. They're smart. They'll see through it. I know, but I have to try. They're my children. I love them. Then show them that with actions, not words. Actions over time. Consistency. That's what rebuilds trust. Okay. He took a breath. Thank you for talking to me. And Carol, I really am sorry for all of it. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, hands covered in flour, and felt something unexpected. Peace. Not forgiveness that would take time, if it came at all, but peace with the situation, with my choices, with where I'd ended up. The New Year's Eve party was for a 50th wedding anniversary, a couple who'd been through everything together and were still choosing each other. As I watched them dance, surrounded by children and grandchildren, I felt a pang of something that might have been grief for what I'd lost. But then I looked around at what I'd built. My business, my independence, I'd learned to value my own company, to find satisfaction in my work, to build a life that was mine alone. My phone buzzed. A group text from my children. Happy New Year, Mom. We're doing a video call at midnight. Be ready. At 11:59 p.m., I stood in my empty commercial kitchen, phone in hand. watching my 3 children's faces appear on screen. They were at their respective homes, celebrating with their partners, but they'd made time for this. 10, 9, 8. We counted together. Happy New Year, they shouted as the clock struck midnight. Happy New Year, my loves, I said, my heart full. Mom, we wanted to tell you something, Melissa said, her face serious. We've been talking, the 3 of us, about Dad, about everything, and we wanted you to know that we understand now. Everything you went through, everything you protected us from. You didn't have to do it alone, Jacob added, but we're grateful that you were strong enough to do it anyway. We're proud of you, Sophie finished, for building your business, for standing up for yourself, for showing us what strength really looks like. I blinked back tears. I'm proud of you too, all of you, for handling this with such maturity, for making your own choices about your relationships, for being the kind of people who value honesty and integrity. We learned from the best. Tom called from off-screen. We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily. They told me about their plans for the new year. I told them about new catering contracts. We laughed about the twins' latest antics. We didn't talk about Richard, and that felt right. He wasn't the center of our story anymore. The settlement was finalized in mid-January. Richard agreed to pay $280,000 in previously undisclosed assets, plus a percentage of his investment gains, plus my legal fees. The total came to just over $400,000. More importantly, the court added a clause requiring full financial disclosure for the next 5 years, with severe penalties for any additional hidden assets. My lawyer called with the news. You won completely. How does it feel? Like I can finally exhale, I said truthfully. With the settlement money, I expanded my catering business, hired more staff, and opened a small cafe that doubled as a teaching kitchen. I started offering free cooking classes to single parents, people who were learning to rebuild their lives. Just as I had. Richard sent letters to the kids, as promised. I read them first. They were raw, honest, and took full responsibility without making excuses. Whether the kids chose to respond was up to them. Melissa eventually did. Jacob and Sophie needed more time. That was their right. Amanda started her own consulting firm with renewed vigor and, I heard through mutual acquaintances, was doing remarkably well. We'd had coffee once more. A brief conversation where she thanked me again for my honesty and wished me well. I did the same for her. We would never be friends, but we'd reached a place of mutual respect. 6 months after that fateful Christmas brunch, I stood in my cafe during the grand opening, surrounded by friends, employees, and customers. My children were there, beaming with pride. The twins ran through the space, excited by the balloons and the special kid-sized aprons I'd made for them. A reporter from local flavor magazine approached me. Ms. Henderson, what does this new venture mean to you? I thought about the question. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, devastated, financially manipulated, unsure of her worth. I thought about the journey to this moment. It means that endings can become beginnings, I said finally. That when someone takes something from you unfairly, you don't have to let that define your story. You can build something new, something that's entirely yours, something that no one can take away because it's built on truth and hard work and self-respect. That's beautiful, the reporter said, scribbling notes. It's also true, I added, and truth matters. It always matters. As the evening wound down and the last customers left, my children helped me clean up. We worked together in comfortable silence. The rhythm of family restored, but different now, built on honesty, on mutual respect, on understanding that love doesn't require sacrifice of self. Mom, Sophie said as she wiped down tables, do you think you'll ever date again? I paused, considering, maybe, someday, but I'm not in a hurry. I'm learning that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. I'm good company for myself these days. You're good company for everyone, Jacob said, pulling me into a hug. Group hug, Ethan shouted, and suddenly I was surrounded by my children and grandchildren, held in a web of love that I'd fought to protect and rebuild. This, I thought, was what winning looked like. Not a dramatic confrontation or a devastating comeback. Just this, standing in a space I'd created, with people I loved, living a life I'd built with my own hands. Richard sent a text that night. Saw the article about your cafe, congratulations. You deserve every success. I read it, smiled, and didn't respond. He was learning, slowly, that actions mattered more than words. And I was learning that I didn't need his validation or approval. I had my own. As I locked up the cafe and drove home through the spring evening, I thought about revenge stories. About how they usually end with the wronged party triumphant and the wrongdoer destroyed. But real life was more nuanced than that. Real revenge was simply living well, building something meaningful, and refusing to let someone else's choices diminish your worth. The unexpected reaction I'd gotten from Richard: the crumbling facade, the desperate apologies, the loss of his children's trust wasn't something I'd planned or orchestrated. It was simply the natural result of his own actions catching up with him. All I'd done was stop protecting him from consequences and start protecting myself. And that, I realized as I pulled into my driveway, was the best revenge of all. Not destruction, but liberation. Not his downfall, but my rise. The house was quiet as I entered, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, full of possibility. Mine. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and pulled out my journal. I wrote about the day, about the cafe, about my children's faces as they helped me celebrate. I wrote about forgiveness, not of Richard, not yet, but of myself, for the years I'd stayed, for the signs I'd missed, for being human enough to love someone who couldn't love me back the way I deserved. The last thing I wrote before closing the journal was this: today I learned that happy endings don't look the way we expect them to. They don't always include the person we thought we'd end up with. Sometimes happy endings are about ending up with yourself whole, strong, and free. And that's not just enough. It's everything. Outside my window, spring was turning into summer. The garden I'd planted last year was blooming. Life was moving forward, as it always did, and so